Yasmin Kadu here, your Dearborn girl poster child that loves all things social justice and is a lifelong learner. Today's episode of Saja series, we're talking about mental health with some mental health advocates at the table. So I have Saja, Yusra, and Sara with me today. Hi, ladies.
Hello. Hi, thank you for having us.
Thank you for being on.
Of course.
So before we start delving into mental health in Dearborn, tell me a little bit about your backgrounds and kind of the work that you do, since you guys are all mental health advocates.
So I'm currently a student at Wayne State right now. I'm studying clinical mental health counseling and art therapy. I've had the privilege to do a lot of research with the refugee population, specifically Syrian refugees, and I do art therapy workshops through my mental wellness in the community.
Amazing.
And my name is Yusra. I got my bachelor's and master's in social work from Wayne State. I'm a licensed therapist. I'm also a macro social worker, and I lead my mental wellness at the Islamic Center Detroit.
Okay, my name is Saja. I am a third-year doctoral student in clinical psychology. I have done 1 year of in-house practicum, just seeing patients and conducting assessments. I've also worked at a assessment center that does police psychology, and I got experience from that, and currently just really interested in working with the community and trying to research and find ways to improve mental health in society.
Amazing. Okay, so tell me, how did you guys all start the work that you're doing, and kind of what inspires you? So whoever wants to take that one.
So I think we all have our own personal attachment when it comes to mental health, whether it be our own personal journey or someone that we love. Mine in specific began when I was about 17, and that's when I started dealing with anxiety. And at this time, I really didn't have much knowledge on what mental health was, more so mental illness and the negative connotations that were attached to it. So that kind of led the way as to how I was going to navigate through my journey. I spent a lot of time feeling very hard on myself. I just felt like these weren't thoughts that I was supposed to be having, and I wasn't going through like the normal motions of life like everybody else was doing. I found myself comparing myself a lot to my classmates, like specifically at this time, it was the end of senior year. Everyone was super excited for like senior party, graduation, moving forward, and I kept looking at them and wondering, why am I not like you? Why am I not as excited? Why am I like riddled with anxiety and worried about like the trajectory of where my life is going? And so it was kind of like a dark time where I think my self-esteem and idea of self-worth really took a hit. And although I found catharsis in like the creative process and art making in the time, once I got into undergrad, it wasn't enough for me. And I think what I really needed and wanted at the time was just one person, and it could have been literally anyone, to just tell me like, your thoughts and feelings are valid, and like what you're going through is normal, and like I see you and I hear you, and I didn't have that. So that's what has led me, and like why I feel like I'm gravitating towards the mental health profession, is because I want to be that source of light in the community that I didn't have at the time. So if just one person can reach out to me and see me as like this safe space and this safe person, I'll feel at peace.
Wow, that's so beautiful. Your purpose is directly aligned with what you needed.
Yeah.
I love that.
So the reason why I went into this is, at first I had no idea that this was even a thing. Like, I didn't even know social work was a profession. I didn't know mental health was like a field. And so I started my college experience, and then I came across, psychology classes, and I've always had an interest in psychology, but I didn't know that social work was a field. And what I liked personally about social work was how broad the field was, because I like the clinical work and I like macro work, because I feel like community work is just as important as clinical work. And so I found a profession that I could kind of bring in both of my, passion together, and that was the clinical, helping people one-on-one, talking to people, being that person that, people need, and then doing things for my whole community, especially Dearborn. I grew up feeling like we didn't have that many resources, or we didn't have many people to kind of, represent the community in a whole, and like bring resources that everyone needed. So that's why social work was just perfect for me. And so I went into it. I loved the field, and I was able to kind of do what I really wanted, and was, start an organization based at a mosque, and bring in those resources that the community needs, and then also, provide the therapy, listen to people's stories, having that intimate connection with people where you're hearing their thought, you're hearing what they have to say, and you're validating who they are. So that's why I went into this field, and that's why I continue to enjoy it.
That's amazing.
Wow.
That's
Great, yeah. I guess how I got interested in psychology, it started pretty early, I'd say. I was in high school and I had a class in psychology, and it was so interesting. I loved learning about all the different kind of disorders and personality disorders, and at that time I took it kind of funny. I was like, oh, this reminds me of like my mom, and this reminds me of my friend, just like diagnosing people as a kid, which is not what you're supposed to do. Please let a professional do that. Don't do that by yourself. But that's when I guess it started. It just captured my attention. It was so fascinating. And I'm a people person. I love people. I love getting to know people and just the one-on-one special relationship and connection. So going into undergrad, I started going down the typical journey of pre-med, which I'm sure many of us have considered one point or another. My parents, being refugees from Iraq, they really came here and wanted us to have a really successful and secure future. So that was my intention, starting U of M Dearborn, and I took some science classes, and it just wasn't for me. I was not interested. It was something I dragged doing. I never wanted to do homework assignments. I hated lab. It just wasn't something I enjoyed. So then I decided to take an intro to psychology class at the college level this time, and you really got a full picture of all the different fields of psychology. So anything from neuro to cognitive to clinical, all sorts of different aspects. And I'm like, this is actually really fascinating. But could I make a career out of this? Could I do something that can make my parents proud, and can I take this as far as I can? So I actually spoke to the professor at that time, and I was like, look, I really like psychology, but what can I do with this? Because like Yusra mentioned, I didn't even know some of these things were careers or fields. Wow. I just didn't know. So my professor actually was kind enough to lend me a book that he had that was all the careers in psychology. And I took it home and I flipped through and I went through everything, and the career that really I found myself really drawn to was clinical psychology, because to me that really encompassed everything that I wanted to do. I could do more one-on-one by talking to people and hearing them and their stories, and that was something I really wanted to do, the one-on-one work. I could also do it in a larger level. I could be a researcher and contribute to the field of education. I could be a professor, and then I can also do things like assessment and testing. So to me that was a field that I just really found myself drawn to. And there was some resistance, obviously, from family when it's like, hey, I'm going to go into clinical psychology. And they're like, what's that? They just didn't know what that was. So I explained that to them, and, alhamdulillah, went through the bachelor's and decided I was going to apply for my doctorate. In my mind, if I wanted to do something, I just wanted to go the highest I could get. So I did, and I just completed my second year and starting my third, and it's been a great journey since then.
Amazing, amazing. You guys, it's interesting because you all have personal connections to why you do the work that you do, and I feel like mental health specifically is something that's so delicate that you have to have that genuine connection, or it just probably makes the work a little bit harder and probably not as fulfilling too. Mm-hmm. So Yusra, you said something very interesting where you said community work is as important as the actual services. So you two are both at My Mental Wellness, and you guys are housed in a mosque. Mm-hmm. So tell me a little bit about the work that you guys do specifically, and kind of how religion and mental health are intertwined together.
So I think the idea of starting a committee or an organization like this at a mosque was I was at a lecture at a mosque one day, and someone was speaking on depression, and they weren't qualified to speak on it. Mm-hmm. And so and they were speaking, and I really, first of all, I noticed that the impact it had on people and how important it was to have qualified licensed professionals speak about it. And then I noticed that our mosques are our community centers where people go to for any other issues in their lives, right? So and that's a good thing. So if there's a personal family issue, a mental health issues, people come to the mosque before they go to a mental health professional. That's just the reality of it. usually a mental health professional is their last option. And so they'll go to the imam, they'll go to whoever at the mosque is, they'll go to their family friends, and way before they think about going to a mental health professional. And I realized that this was a really important place to be. And connecting kind of faith and mental health together with a healthy balance. Something that I've noticed is that when we speak about faith and mental health, we have two extremes. And one extreme is that if you have any mental health issues, if you are depressed, then you're lacking faith, or you need to pray more, or you're not as spiritual, you're not that religious. And then we have the other extreme where people think that faith has nothing to do with mental health. And I don't agree with either extremes, and I feel like there can be a healthy middle ground for everyone. And it doesn't matter what your views on religion or what you personally practice right now. I still felt like a mosque was a good place to be and provide those resources. And the programs that we have at My Mental Wellness, so many people have come, so many different types of people. We have non-Muslims that come to our events as well. And the way we have our program is we provide that safe, non-judgmental place for people. It's not a place to talk about all the disagreements that we have. It's a place to talk about mental health, right? And just because we have the support of the mosque, we have the support of spiritual leaders, and I feel like those are the people that we really need to connect with. And I think we're definitely much stronger together, working with spiritual leaders. And I feel like they are there to support. I've never gotten any kind of negative feedback from any leaders there. And the mosque itself is very open, very welcoming to everyone. So I felt like it was a good place. And then also to bring in the qualified mental health professionals to come in and give the resources that are necessary. Because I felt like mosques were lacking that, to be honest.
It's very interesting because you hear a lot of people say you can't have depression if you have faith. So what would you say to somebody that says that?
Well, I feel that, you can definitely be spiritual, you can definitely be religious and have faith and still go through any personal issues. And I feel that a lot of people understand that. I think people just have maybe a different understanding of what depression is, right? Because we could all agree that we have those bad days, and we could all agree that we all become sad, And so I feel like sometimes people just don't like the term, or they have a different meaning to it. But we cannot deny that everyone feels sad at some point in their life, and that looks differently on everyone. And I think religion promotes, seeking, professional help. And I feel like people forget about that too. So, having faith promotes going to therapy. So I think people just sometimes don't understand it the same way as everyone.
Yeah. I'm going to give you guys a shameless plug because you were telling me about how when people come, so you refer people to therapists, and so you have this huge inventory of therapists in the community that are Arab and or Muslim. So anyone that's listening that is considering therapy or considering any mental health services, they are your one-stop shop, where if you have something, they will help you find someone. So I think the work you guys do is amazing, and it's so important in the community.
Thank you.
So when we talk about the community, we talk about needs when it comes to mental health, and I think that there are so many things we could get into with that, but what are the top needs that you guys think that, and anyone can take this, when it comes to mental health and even just starting to have conversations? And what are your hopes, and what does this look like?
I guess I can start talking about this. So first, I just want to comment on the community in general is so much better on the topic on mental health than it used to be. Not saying that there isn't room for improvement. So that's what I wanted to say first off, because sometimes...
In comparison to when, though?
So I'm thinking of it more like when I was younger in middle school or high school, where I really did not hear about people going to therapy. And now I feel like it's more not only acknowledged by, some of my friends and peers, but also I am seeing a lot of centers put together very nice workshops, very nice events. Like the work that you guys do at the mosque, I think is phenomenal. With mental health, we talk a lot about how parents are such a great influence on children, and a lot of times the way that parents raise their kids has a huge effect on the child's well-being and how they grow up to be. So to address it from that perspective, from maybe an older generation that may go to the mosque, in addition to youth that could seek services on their own, it's just really tackling both aspects of it. And in terms of and this is just, some ideas of what the community could possibly do, I really enjoy when there are lectures on psychoeducation. And like Yusra was saying, a lot of people have bad days, but what distinguishes that from depression? There needs to be more talks about that. And I know I was talking to you earlier just about more normalization, about going to therapy, just adding it to the conversation. I know, like, for me personally, I've been going to therapy and I quite enjoy it, and it is something that our program recommends. As becoming a mental health professional, it's really important to kind of go through it yourself before you go ahead and do this service to other people, kind of like tasting your own medicine before giving it out. And now, before I would tell people like, hey, I have an appointment, or I have a doctor's appointment, or I have an errand to run, where now it's like, hey, so I have therapy at 3, but you want to hang out at 4:30?
Yeah.
Just make it more normal. It's not like I want to go on social media and blast like, blah, 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 I have this disorder, or just like scream it on the wall. Sure, some people may feel like that's their own way of bringing awareness, but I believe, in my own opinion, in terms of awareness, I just want to kind of, I think, see more normalization in the community. Not necessarily like tattooing it on your forehead, but just add it to the conversation. Like, we have sore throat, we go to the doctor. Why can't, when we're feeling distress in our emotional and personal life, why can't we seek help and make that normal?
Yeah, it's funny because it's all about like perception, and that's like a huge thing where we talk about this a lot on the show, where it's hype culture. But I think mental health specifically though too, where people often, if you're depressed, it could be as a sign of weakness, and with that comes shame, and with that comes dishonoring your entire family, where normalizing the conversation and making it so people are able to have these conversations with older generations is huge. But what tactics have you guys all used to normalize the conversation? That example is amazing, but I'd love to hear what you guys think.
I think specific for me why I love art therapy so much is it just kind of sounds non-threatening.
Wait, can you tell us what art therapy is?
Sure. So art therapy is a mental health profession where we use psychotherapy and different mediums of art to help improve the mental and physical well-being of our clients. So as art therapists, we're trained to basically decode nonverbal messages and symbols and colors in our clients' artwork to try to get a better understanding of what they're going through and how to proceed forward from there.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
That's
So,
amazing.
thank you. So, that's why I love it so much, is because parents kind of like when they bring their kids to the ICD, I feel like they just hear art and they assume that their kids are going to be doing arts and crafts. But when they watch us, they can kind of see like how deep we go with it, and it's kind of like a pleasant surprise for them, especially when they see how their kids are reacting to it. So, when it kind of gets them to be more comfortable and kind of normalize this idea of therapy for them. So I think using art therapy and kind of introducing it to the community has been my way of trying to get people used to the idea of therapy and self-help and mental health.
Yeah, I mean, even like with self-care and like self-love, because even for me, when you say art therapy, I think about like I'm very de-stressed if I paint. Like I love painting. And
Awesome.
I think, yeah, so I think it's just like putting in like just random like self-love and like self-care practices though too, and kind of like finding that little thing that like gives you sort of an outlet too with as far as like de-stressing and whatnot.
Yeah.
But
I just wanted to add something to that. When normalizing it, what I've realized works is speaking in the language that people understand. Because in the mental health field, there's a lot of terms that people don't use on their regular day, and it seems so distant and abstract to them that when we start to use words or we describe it in words that they understand, and this is for everyone at different ages, because during our art therapy workshops, we have it for both children and adults. And I've noticed, like, for example, when we had it with a child, you know, she was feeling nervous, and, you know, her stomach started to hurt her. And she's like, you know, I feel like there's something in my stomach, and it's like, and then, you know, we started to talk about it, and it's basically anxiety, you know, but she doesn't understand what anxiety is. And I feel like that's the same thing with adults as well, you know. And so when you break it down to them, you know, use words that they understand, that's how we can normalize it. You know, especially immigrant populations, right? Our, you know, older parents that are coming in, you know, we talk about the stigma with mental health, but you know, the stigma is there for a reason, and I think there's a lot of that stigma is because of misunderstanding. And when we kind of put ourselves in their shoes, and you know, we figure out what their priorities are, and we were just talking about this on our way here. They don't see everything the same way we do. They, you know what I mean? Like, for a lot of our parents and our immigrants, mental health is not a priority for them because they have so many other things to think about, like their basic needs, or, you know, all of the things that we don't have to think about because they took care of it, right? And so that's not, you know, that's a language that they speak, and we have to understand where they're coming from. Just like how we do with children, we have to do that with everyone else. You know, their perspective on things are different, so we have to understand where they're coming from, and we can't normalize it until we speak it and understand it in their language and how they understand, you know, how they see things.
Absolutely. You're I'm so happy that you pointed that out though too, because I think sometimes we are very quick, like especially like a younger generation, to be like upset at the older generation for not understanding mental health, but there's a lot around it where you're absolutely right. They didn't have time. Right. And even like trauma being transferred from generation, or trauma from refugees, you didn't understand the things that you were carrying with you too, where I'm sure speaking in like ways that people understand, like, make it so these conversations can happen. But besides doing that, what else would you, like, how would you guys recommend that you move forward with older generations?
You guys want to add anything?
I think also, like, talking about the work that's done at my mental wellness, if someone's not quite ready for therapy, we have a lot of great resources, such as like divorce support groups and things like that. Like, there's something for everyone that they can touch upon and kind of relate to, so that if they're not necessarily ready for therapy, they can kind of just see it as like just a sit down, like a table talk. So that's like the first step in getting them forward to getting the help that they need.
Support, like a support group type deal?
Yeah, so we have a lot of different support groups. With my mental wellness, we kind of address everyone at different levels. So we work on prevention, education, and recovery. Okay. So we do the preventative things. We have the support groups. We have psychoeducation. We have workshops of different topics. And then we have the support groups. We have a divorce women support group. We have a depression and anxiety support group. We have substance abuse support groups. We've had art therapy. So we try to address different populations. We've tried to, address seniors as well. They have they're lacking resources as well, especially older people, and we try to address different types of populations. And we're working on now a support group for mothers with special needs children, right? There's so many different types of populations within our community that have issues that we're not addressing. We're not giving them the space that they need to address it. So just kind of going to people where they're at, because everyone is at different phases in their life. Some people need the education, and some people need the recovery, the support, and some people need, everyone has their own different needs. And I feel like my mental wellness gives them something wherever they're at.
And just to add on to what Yusra was saying, I very much agree with you what you mean by meeting them where they are. I know, for example, if there are children or teenagers that come and say, hey, my child's having this problem or whatever, that comes to us, even if, we're not saying hey, these are our services. People just know, you're a mental health person, I'm going to come to you if I have any questions. Mm-hmm. And you try to explain to them, I think this person could benefit from going to therapy or seeking help. And sometimes the older generation may not be receptive to that. So it definitely is important to use the language, and I know we focus and we're talking about that, to meet them where they are. I mean, what is their goal? Their goal is they want their best for their children, right? This is why they're anxious when their kids are out at night. This is why they're very wary about who their friends are, maybe going through their phones, their laptops, like, you hear it all. Parents just care a lot. I mean, from what I've seen, I'm sure there's all sorts of parents, but a lot of times when they do those actions, it's because they care. And if you kind of explain to them how prevention is really important, how maybe letting them have this help now can help, inshallah, like, not be a tragedy later in the future, because this community is very special, and it's not like any other community, really. The parents that came here came from war-torn countries sometimes, and, people have this, like, fight or flight, these things inside of them. So parents might just be thinking, like, I need to protect my kid no matter what. So we have to really meet them where they're at and just speak to them like, hey, you really care about the safety of your child, let me help you. Sometimes those parents might say, direct me to an Arab or Muslim. I need someone that can understand and I can talk to. Great, help them with that. Sometimes you'll actually hear parents say, I don't want anyone in the community to know, so can you refer me to someone that's non-Arab and non-Muslim, maybe 30 miles away from where I live, just so no one can see me drive there. At that point, you really just have to provide resources and help where they're at, and hopefully that can make a difference.
And if they're looking for privacy, then that's their right, I feel like now we try to, people have that shame, or they want to protect their reputation or whatever, and we're going really hard at them, like, no, you should be, because our generation is just open about everything. And that shame is there for a reason, and we have to understand why it's there. How did they grow up? What were they raised? What kind of values did they have? And I feel like that's why it's so important to have, like, culturally competent therapists in the community, because it's not the same when someone else is coming out from a different community telling them about about things that they have no idea, have never experienced. And so, like, you come into therapy, and what's really nice is about having, like, Arab or Muslim therapists is you come to therapy without having to explain so much, right? You don't have to sit there and explain your culture. You don't have to explain your religion. You don't have to explain all the stereotypes about you. I during my grad school, we would talk about different clients, and they would say a lot of things about Muslim women clients, and they would say, oh, they're oppressed and they're this and that, and I'm just like, imagine how they would feel, like you're bringing in the same stereotypes about them, and that's exactly what they don't need. So if you have a therapist or someone that already understands all that culture and religion about your faith and your identity, then you don't have to explain that all in therapy. So you just don't have to kind of keep trying to justify things or explain your everything about who you are and your culture. So providing the people that share the same values or understand their culture is really, really important in normalizing mental health, because we have to understand where they're coming from and letting them understand that we understand where they're coming from, and it's okay for them to be where they're at. What we have to figure out what is adding to the stigma, why it's not being normalized, and then kind of speak to them like we've been mentioning, where they're at, and this is what you can do about it. Therapy is just speaking to someone, and usually when they come to therapy, they realize, oh, this is it, like, I feel so much better. But usually people think therapy is a lot scarier than it actually is, and they realize I'm speaking to someone that understands me, that understands my community, and I'm healing at the same time, and they have that professional experience as well. So it's definitely not as scary as they think it is, but we have to kind of like hold their hands throughout the process.
Okay, so one of the reasons why I was so excited to get you guys to come on is because you guys are actual Arab Muslims that live and work in the Dearborn community, and you guys are able to advocate for the community better than people that are not Arab or not Muslim are able to do that. We find that a lot of the research that is done on mental health is not done by Arabs or Muslims, and like, why do you guys think that's the case? And then even with that kind of the more extreme, where do you feel like that research is skewed, or even like advocating for our community is skewed when we don't have people to represent ourselves?
Well, I guess I can start talking about that from like the academic perspective, just being in a university. From what I've come across in terms of research with Arabs and Muslims, a lot of what I've seen is conducted mainly by non-Arab and non-Muslims writing about Arabs and or Muslims. And nothing wrong with that. Everyone can choose to research what they like, but it really is really important for our own people to write our own narrative, to research our own narrative. And I think that goes hand in hand with what Dearborn Girl does. I mean, this is run by Dearborn Girls, it's organized by Dearborn Girls, and we're Dearborn Girls. Yeah. And it just adds a sense of like authenticity to the topic, and you tend to be more passionate when it's something about yourself. And in terms of like research, for example, when you are approaching these very sensitive cultural differences or religious differences, it could be really easy to carry maybe like, I don't want to say ignorance, but like being unaware. Biases, yes, things that you're just maybe not even consciously aware of that may arise. And that could happen. Could it unconsciously maybe lead the direction of research in some way? Possibly. It's just really important that to get both aspects of it. It's great that research is being conducted on Arabs and Muslims. It's something relatively new. A lot of the immigration from Arabs occurred, in the 80s and the 90s. So it's kind of like a newer kind of population that just hasn't really existed in this large amount in America. So I think there's a lot of work to be done, and I really think that Arabs and Muslims should kind of step it up in the field of academia. I've seen a lot of people in the community have started to go in that direction, and it makes me so proud, and it's something that I hope to continue to research too, because this is how we're going to get recognition. We need empirical data. We need research. How are we going to be taken seriously in these conferences, in these academic journals, if we don't have actual studies backing us up? We can talk day and night, but it's really important to have that backing so that we can be respected and represented amongst everyone else. And honestly, that's just where I was thinking of it as, and I just think it's really important.
I think the most infuriating part about all of that is that when the research is done and Arabs are clumped into the white category. So when you look at this data, you don't have a box on the census. And then you don't have a place where all of this trauma or mental health barriers are like even being able to like measure it at all ever. And it's just something that it's definitely something that we need to advocate for too.
And you have to remember that the techniques and the approaches that we use in therapy is based off of research and data. So we are now using therapeutic techniques and methods that are off of data and research that were not done on the population that we're using it on. So that's why certain things don't work with certain populations in terms of therapy, because it wasn't conducted on that group. You know what I mean? So that's why, and you'll find that, as a therapist and also with research, that when you're learning something, you read it and you're like, that would never work on an Arab. That will never work on a Muslim. Yeah. And you have to remember that research came from, non-Arabs and non-Muslims. So that's why it doesn't work. And that's why some Muslims or Arab think therapy is a joke. You know what I mean? Because there's not enough, research that was done to make sure that therapy was accommodating and, considerate of where they come from and what they believe.
And if you just think about theory, how was theory developed? Based on civilizations in Europe, in the West, individualistic societies. We have to think about Arabs come from a very collectivist society and culture. And not only that, you have with first generation, second generation, you have the complicated factor of assimilation. Now there's a bicultural identity. So there's just all these extra factors, and like Yusra, you were saying, it's hard to see if these techniques are going to work, and how can we test them? We need to do more research and see if this does work.
Right.
I was telling this to Yusra, on our way here. I feel like I've gotten a lot of negative reactions towards some of the research I've done, and I think that's where, the issue of, xenophobia comes into our community, is where I've had a lot of comments like, you're Lebanese, why are you working with Syrians? Why do you care so much? Just because there's a lot of conflict between, the Lebanese people and the Syrians at the time, and I just feel like there's just a basic lack of empathy amongst people, and I feel like if you're not going into it for the right reasons and strictly treating these people like Exhibit A or Sample Group B, it's not genuine, and you're not going to have the right results in the end. Yeah.
I agree.
So interesting. I mean, there's just so much nuance to the story too of mental health that we can't even begin to unravel it. I want to bring it back to Dearborn a little, and so unfortunately, there's been deaths in the community that no one wants to talk about, and I want to know from a professional advocate standpoint, why does no one want to talk about it?
Well, I think we have to ask ourselves, why are we talking about it? And it depends on whatever the issue is, but do we want to talk about it because as a very close community we can be nosy sometimes and we want to know what's going on in our community, or we genuinely care about the issues that are happening in our community? Because I feel like what we lack is consistency in advocating for some of the issues that we do, So whether that be suicide, whether that's drugs, whether that, whatever issue that we have, I feel like there's only certain times that our community wants to talk about things. And many times that could be the wrong time, And so we have to, consider what people are going through in our community. Is this the right time? And what reasons are people not talking about it? And we have to understand that, all families have a right to not talk about whatever they don't want to talk about. And we can't pressure families, or we can't kind of bully them into speaking about something that they don't want to speak about. And because, number one, that's personal. And to be honest, and to be very blunt, it's really none of our business at that point. And also, we have to understand that, like I mentioned, like we have to be genuine about the reason why we're asking. But when a crisis does happen in the community, there's grief that's going on, there's personal issues, there's family issues, there's all of this other things that we're not considering, and we're only looking at it from a selfish perspective, where, oh, you guys need to be open, you need to be talking about it, you can't hide the shame, or why are you guys not talking about it, you're adding stigma. I don't necessarily agree with that. I don't feel like a family not talking about a specific issue in the community is adding stigma. I think there's a time and place to talk about stuff, and we can't use people's their crisis or their issues or whatever they're going through as something to kind of fall back on and say, oh, we need to advocate for this right now, and that's not our place. That's their their say in whether they want to speak on something or not. And we have to respect the way people grieve. We have to respect the way people think and view things as well. So I feel like we need to really be considerate of what other families are going through, and to question what we are our intentions on these issues. And if we truly care about it, I feel like we'd be consistent about why we are asking these questions, and we would advocate on suicide prevention or drug overdose throughout the whole year, and not when a crisis happens in the community. So that's what I personally think about this. I feel like we need to just be a little more sensitive and aware of what other people are going through, and to remember that these are their their rights, and it's not for us to have a say in how people feel or think and what they should do with their own personal matters.
So you would advocate prevention and education before, like, the onset of a problem like that, and kind of just not putting blame on after, because you're right, you do bring up so many interesting points that people don't think about, though, too, because I think the instantaneous reaction is just to be mad and infuriated, right. Where you're right, it should be a constant thing where we are educating our community and we are putting in prevention strategies.
Right, and the whole blaming thing, mm-hmm. I think that's the wrong time to put the blame, and really that's the time where families need support. We need to be more understanding, because no one asks for these types of issues, right? No one wants a suicide in their family. No one wants an overdose. No one wants any issues of all sorts in their families. So when they do happen, they're already going through personal things, and we don't need that community pressure on them. We don't need the blame. And that to be honest, no one no one gets all that blame and all of a sudden becomes a advocate for all of this. It just makes things worse, right? It's the support that's needed. It's us reaching out. It's the community being sensitive and aware that will, give the family strength. It's really the wrong time to be blaming anyone, and it's not that like anyone really does all of this and asks for it. This is a crisis for a reason, and no one really wants that, in their family or anywhere. So it's definitely a time for support and not blame.
And to add to what you said about people just blaming the families, we don't know how many times these families have tried to work with their kids, how many times maybe they've found them with drugs and spoke to them about it, or how many times they've caught them maybe attempting suicide and stopping them. People could be sometimes very malicious online, especially in comments, and we were talking about that earlier, just could be very infuriated in the moment and very sad, and their response could maybe be to lash out, be like, well, you guys didn't do enough, or this is a problem we have in our community, look what's happening every other day. We really have to be sensitive, like you were saying, and you don't know what the families went through. You don't know how many attempts they've had to possibly save their child before a tragedy like this happens, and we have to support the families, because, who's to say maybe la samahallah something could happen. We have to be there and support these families too, not to put them in a bad position where maybe something like this could happen again either.
Right. And something we forget often is we don't know what led anything to anyone, right? We don't know what leads to the way they think and feel, and we have to remember that it can really literally be anyone. That could be anyone in our family. That could be one of us. And none of us are safe to always be secure in the way we feel and the way we live and the way, you know what I mean? We're never completely safe of anything. And so when we think about it that way and make it a little more personal, like that could be that could be anyone in my family. That could be anyone that I love. How would I want to be supported? How would I want to be talked to? And that's why the whole like online, people can be really mean online because we forget that there's humans behind all this social media. And when you talk to people in person, they're not who they are on social media. And we lack that over like the social media. We lack the empathy. We forget that there's another human behind a screen that's going to read this and feel about it. So it's pretty much all I have to say about this.
I feel like there's, when like tragedy strikes in our community, I feel like there's like a big sense of like entitlement. Like people feel entitled to other people's stories, but you cannot
exactly
bring yourself into the way that other people want to grieve and the way that they want to handle their grief. And I feel like a lot of people hide behind the guise of religion. In reality, they're really just adding insult to injury by adding that judgment onto the family when they really don't need it at that time. And like Yusra said, I think what's really important is having that consistency in our community where we're constantly having that healthy dialogue and making it normalized so that when tragedy strikes, people know how to navigate from there, whether it be through advocating or how to deal with somebody that just had that tragedy going on in their family.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys all for the commentary on that. But I'm going to end it with one last question. What are your aspirations and hopes for the Dearborn community as far as mental health is concerned?
So I definitely want to see more safe spaces like my mental wellness at the ICD. Even more platforms like this where you guys are giving us a chance to talk about this and reach such a wide audience, because I'm sure it's not only, I'm sure majority is Dearborn, like females and Muslim, but I'm sure you guys have another audience that sees us like advocating and going outside of these normal gender roles that we're expected to follow and really putting ourselves out there in the field, which I definitely appreciate. So yeah.
I would definitely want to see a lot of more resources. Exactly what Sara mentioned about more safe places for people to talk about things where they're not being judged. And ideally, I would want a place, our community, to be at a place where if they were going through any personal issue, they would know where to go. That would be ideally where I would want our community to be, where if they were going through a family issue, depression, anywhere, they know a place that they could go to, or they know a person that they could go to. So I feel like we're moving towards that. I feel like there's definitely been more conversations on mental health, and I would want to see more people going into this field and doing more work on the topic of mental health, especially with the Muslim community and the Arab community. And I would, just to see more community work, more professionals in our community do this that genuinely love this type of work. So that's what I would wish for our community.
Well, I mean, I certainly agree with both of what you guys said. That was very beautifully said and well spoken. Just to add to what you guys were saying, easily accessible resources, not only to young adults, which maybe, that's who we are and that's maybe who we're thinking of, but even starting younger than that. Why don't we, in schools, let people know? I mean, you talked about maybe your feelings of anxiety probably started sooner. I would assume, sometimes people that have those feelings, it's something that they've maybe felt their whole life. I know in high school it was very tough and competitive time. Like, I got to get into the best colleges. I got to get the high score in the ACT. Maybe some people were really suffering. I'm sure they were, actually. I'm not saying maybe, they probably were. We should have resources for them available. A lot of times people maybe come to us and say, do you know someone I can talk to? Because we are someone that maybe they were friends with them or they trust us, but I really think it should be more easily accessible.
Right.
There is definitely a lot more conversation happening, and that is something I'm really happy to see. And, 10 years ago, I could never imagine just having an open conversation about mental health publicly and saying hey, I go to therapy, and just accepting that because that's what it is. And, having, Islamic centers, host these wonderful groups and events. And, also I know in other mosques they've done the same thing and collaborating with other organizations. It's becoming a real conversation. And we just, I think, need to be consistent, need to keep working on it, and to continue with the scholarly work. And that's something I'm really driving home, hopefully graduating with my PhD in 5 to 7 years, but hopefully sometime in the future. Just really continuing to do work on our people, on people of our culture, of our faith, and to not be afraid to have a voice and go out there. Go to the conferences in California and Chicago and Florida. Just don't be ashamed. Don't be, no one's going to care about us. No, this is a very, important group. This is, you have people coming from, PTSD, refugee past probably, or people trying to figure out their identity here, and people that have really assimilated. You really have such a wide range of people, and how can we help them if we don't understand them? And that's something I think that research can definitely help us find some answers to those questions.
Absolutely. I think it's amazing that you guys kind of all highlighted the fact that our community needs to understand how important this problem is, and I think we've done that first step. So to continue the conversation is what we'll all have to do, and giving people access to the services that you guys do and normalizing the conversation. So thank you guys. This was so important.
Thank you for having us.
But before we end, I do want to let everyone listening know that if you or someone you know needs help, the emergency telephone suicide prevention and referrals for mental health services in Wayne County is 313-224-7000, or the free confidential counseling, crisis information, and referrals, call 1-800-232-1127. And then our friends at My Mental Wellness.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
We're here to help.
Yes, so yeah, thanks guys.
Thank you.